In 1957, the United States Army gave Whirlpool a weapons contract, the washing machine company. At Picatinny Arsenal, Whirlpool's engineers were asked to solve a problem artillery had faced since the Civil War. How do you stop a massed infantry assault after it reaches the guns? Their answer was a 105mm shell packed with 8,000 fin-stabilized steel darts. Each one was about the size of a finishing nail, and each one carried 4 tiny fins. They flew point forward like miniature arrows. A mechanical time fuse could detonate the instant it left the barrel. The aluminum casing shattered. 8,000 flechettes sprayed forward in a flat, expanding cone at roughly 1,500 feet per second. One pull of the lanyard turned a field howitzer into a shotgun. Not a metaphor, a literal shotgun. On the fire base at LZ Bird, the round stopped being theory. 8,000 steel darts rode one blast, and the pattern covered nearly 30 meters at 100 meters out. They called it Beehive. Its first combat use came on the night of December 27, 1966. 3 battalions took the blast, over 250 dead. That blast mattered in open ground. At the wire, it changed shape for every gunner inside the perimeter. 3 o'clock in the morning. A fire base was a small, fortified artillery post, and the crew sat behind sandbags, concertina wire, claymores, and trip flares. Claymores threw fragments forward. The howitzer still pointed outward, high in the air, built for indirect fire against troops miles away. Indirect fire lets the crew hit what they cannot see. Too close. Then NVA sappers cut the wire, mortar rounds walked across the position, and hundreds of men pushed through smoke and flare light inside 300 meters. The wire was now the front line. The position had become the target. Now the gun was facing the wrong fight, because the shell was built to arc over terrain and burst on impact or in the air. Wrong angle. At 100 meters, it could overshoot, blow behind the attackers, or land short on the friendly line. There was no time to lower the tube. Machine guns fired and claymores went off, but the rush kept coming, because the NVA knew the math. If enough men reached the wire, some would get through. No margin. Beehive solved that problem in one shot. It was built for the wire, not the hills. At that distance, fragments mattered more than blast. Not the war at range, but the war at the wire. The wire had already closed the fight. So the howitzer dropped nearly flat. The range was inside. The M546 APERS-T round was built for close-in anti-personnel work. It went in with the mechanical fuse set to muzzle action. That meant the shell burst the instant it cleared the barrel. A green star shell warned friendly troops to get flat. No warning was late. Then the casing split into 4 pieces. The base charge shoved the rear tiers forward, and rifling spun the front tiers outward. 8,000 steel darts filled the air in a flat cone. They flew point first, no tumble, no drift. Each one weighed only 8 grains. An X-ray machine could find them. A jungle field hospital usually could not. A dart that missed the vital organs could still kill days later through infection. Then came LZ Bird. Binh Dinh Province sat on Vietnam's central coast. December 27, 1966. At 1 in the morning, 3 North Vietnamese Army battalions from the 22nd Regiment, about 1,000 men, hit the fire base after a heavy mortar barrage and breached the perimeter. Once the wire gave way, the fight moved into Battery C. NVA troops were already inside, among the guns. The commander of Battery B brought a 105mm howitzer into action and ordered Beehive rounds straight into the center of his own firebase, into the space where the attackers were swarming through his positions. It was desperate, nearly suicidal. Friendly casualties were possible. They were happening anyway. The rounds fired. The assault stalled. After-action reports later credited the Beehive round with blunting the attack and forcing the NVA back. By dawn, defenders counted over 250 enemy dead around the perimeter. 27 Americans were killed too. Major General David Ott, the Army's chief of field artillery, later wrote that LZ Bird proved the round mattered for fire-based defense. A fire base was a fixed artillery position built to cover the approaches. It was no longer theory. The round moved into routine use. From that night on, every fire base in Vietnam kept Beehive rounds ready, with sectors marked before contact. LZ Bird had been chaos. The round was fired in desperation into an overrun position, as a last resort. 3 months later, the NVA answered. At Suoi Tre, the answer came at dawn. March 21, 1967, Tay Ninh Province. 2 NVA battalions from the 272nd Regiment attacked from the east and southeast. The 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry of the 25th Division held the base. The line held because the defense was ready. The battery commander had already marked the Beehive sectors. When the assault wave entered the engagement zone, he gave the order. He told the infantry company commanders to get their men under cover. Then he ordered the 105mm guns to load APERS rounds and fire east and southeast. The guns fired 40 Beehive rounds in one fight, the largest number of M546 rounds used in any battle to that date. The after-action report gave the result in one sentence. Wide gaps tore through the attackers' ranks. Not wounded, not suppressed. Entire sections of the assault line disappeared. The line broke. The count came next. 299 NVA dead, 31 Americans killed. The ratio sat near 10-1. That is how the Army read the fight. The after-action report put the Beehive round at the center of it. It called the shell effective against assaulting troops. Each round carried about 8,000 steel darts. They ripped through a battalion-strength push in the final 100 meters of the approach. The officers wrote it in clinical language. The result had already done the talking. That report changed fire-based defense for the Army. The weapon was a 105mm anti-personnel shell, and the math was simple. American infantry drove survivors back into the tree line. The fight did not stay at the wire. The paper trail stays thin on the enemy side. No captured NVA tactical manual has turned up with the American name for the round. The surviving Vietnamese reports speak in broad terms. Heavy artillery, a wall of fire. After that barrage, the paper trail goes quiet. No declassified archive accessible to researchers shows NVA soldiers using the word Beehive. What survives is the behavior. The documents do not need to spell that out. Before LZ Bird and Suoi Tre, their main assault method was massed infantry. Paper leaves a narrow gap. Action fills that narrow gap. Once close-in fire made the old rush costly, NVA changed the approach. They stopped throwing whole battalions straight in. They went lower, slower, and closer. U.S. intelligence analysts saw the shift after 1967. At Sekhat in October 1967, NVA troops crawled forward and stayed prone. They cut their exposure to the flat path of the flechette cone. They closed to within 20 or 30 meters before contact. That distance mattered. It put defenders at risk if they fired Beehive rounds too late. The attack shape changed with it. Massed infantry waves gave way to sapper-led penetrations. Small teams moved on wire and bunkers. They cut gaps. They opened the way. Final protective fires had changed the cost of a frontal rush, so the next assault came in pieces instead of one wave. The pattern kept tightening by 1969. By then, the Army had refined the method further. Final protective fire was no longer just a last-ditch answer. It had forced the assault to become shorter, lower, and more exact. By June 1969, Beehive had become routine at Crook. Ground surveillance radar and seismic sensors caught NVA forces gathering in the tree line before the assault began. Artillery crews fired Beehive rounds into pre-registered coordinates from sensor data, not as a last resort, but as the first shot. No panic, just data. They did not wait for men inside the wire. They hit formations still assembling in the jungle. Over 2 nights, they found 76 bodies in one sector. And that sector's kill ratio approached 76-1. No last-minute rescue. The shell was built to stop an attack in progress. Now, it stopped attacks before they started. As the war continued, many artillery units leaned on Killer Jr., standard high-explosive rounds with mechanical time fuses set to burst 10 to 30 meters above the ground. The airburst scattered fragments in every direction. It was easier to keep in stock. Stock favored HE, but stock stopped helping at the wire. A mechanical airburst scattered fragments in every direction, while Beehive's cone stayed locked to the sector in front of the gun. Beehive did not. Killer Jr. could not stuff 8,000 projectiles into a 30-meter front. It could not turn the last 100 meters into an unsolved problem for massed infantry in the open. At fire base range, nothing in the American arsenal matched the M546. It still did not win the war.
But it changed the rush. The wire stayed the same. The price changed at once. Before Beehive, men still ran. After Beehive, standing upright meant death. The wire still waited there. The North Vietnamese army adapted quickly because every American weapon pushed them lower, closer to the ground. The last approach turned into a lower, slower attack. They moved in crawling groups. They sent sappers, not battalions. Standing men exposed themselves there. Open rushes stopped working there. Adaptation itself was the testimony. Nobody rewrites assault doctrine for weapons they did not respect. They crawled because standing upright meant death. The assault had changed. The sound stayed with them. One pull of the lanyard sent 8,000 steel darts out at once. At LZ Bird, Suoi Tre, Crook, and dozens of other fire bases, artillerymen remember the hiss after the gun, not the blast itself. Across those positions, the pattern was the same. The round left, and the air turned thin and sharp. They did not keep the shell number, they kept the sound. Years later, that thin noise came back first. 8,000 flechettes racing at 1,500 feet per second made a noise veterans could hear but never quite pin down. Some called it a hiss, some called it a buzz. The men on the other side did not need a word for it. They just stopped coming. Then there was silence.